Good morning, everyone. This is Mr. Sanchez, and I wanted to do a presentation today about environmental racism. So I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. As you know, we've been learning about Hurricane Katrina and the flooding and the response of the government to the needs of the Black community, right? And that is one example of environmental racism that happened in 2005. And we're going to dig a little deeper into what environmental racism is. Um, it's a form of systemic racism whereby communities of color are disproportionately burdened with health hazards through policies and practices that force them to live in proximity to sources of toxic waste, such as sewage works, mines, landfills, power stations, major roads, and emitters of airborne particulate matter. As a result, these communities suffer greater rates of health problems attendant on hazardous pollutants. So as we kind of continue throughout this presentation, I want you to think about how this will affect our own communities. We're going to focus on us, and we live in East Oakland. So let's continue. So how do we see this in Oakland? How do we see this in our beloved city of Oakland? And so one thing we want to go over briefly is the idea of segregation. And we know that segregation is the separation or isolation of a race, class, or ethnic group. Right? We know it's a form of discrimination. And we've studied this a lot at CCPA, in history classes, in English classes, and all kinds of different ways. And we know that we get separated by where we live. We get segregated in our schools. We get segregated by our economic class. And so we're going to use this as a guide to think about environmental racism. So we know that segregation based on race and class give us less resources and more abuses from the gov system. Unfortunately, segregation also lets us see who has more pollution and toxic spaces and who has less. And so here is Oakland. And we know that Oakland, you can see the green area is the hills. It also represents parks and green area. And the yellow are the freeways, which are really important when we're going to talk about air pollution, right, and environmental racism. And we can see, we're going to think about which areas do you think will have more pollution? White middle-class communities or working class communities of color? And let's go ahead and dig a little deeper. All right, so this map is really interesting because what it does is it uses colors to kind of break down where people live based on race. And so you can see red is where white people live. So every dot represents white communities, white households. And you can see in Alameda, and you can see in the hills, there's a lot of red, right? You can also see blue is where black people live, green is Asian, orange is Latino, and gray is other. So let's kind of go a little further. So one thing I want to put on the map is these freeways. These are very important to kind of understand environmental racism. And so I think you guys, some of you who are great with maps or just know, we can identify these two main freeways that we're going to focus on. The one towards the top is the 580. The one closer to the bottom of the screen is the 880. And let's see where white people are predominantly, right? We're thinking about segregation. We're thinking about pollution. And white people are predominantly in these areas, which I'm going to put with a red star. We could see it by using the key and the colors, but we just kind of want to show it in the map a little bit more. So you got up there in Berkeley in the north. You got the hills, Oakland Hills, where I'm kind of going right now. You got over there Walnut Creek and those areas. And then you got all around Alameda, San Leandro. And you can see it's almost like a U-shaped where white people mainly lived around those freeways, right? mainly people of color. These are areas where you have uh, mainly Asian, Black, and Latino, right? Um, and here you have, I'm going to put the color purple. So you can see in West Oakland, there's a lot of actual blue, but also sprinklings of orange and even a little red and some green. And then right there by the lake in the Fruitvale area, you can see a lot of orange, which is Latino, a lot of blue, which is Black, and you see a lot of green, which is Asian. This is a very diverse area. And then sprinklings of white people here in the Fruitvale area and by the lake in the 20s, 30s, 40s. And then down in deep East Oakland, you see also a mix, but you start seeing it become more and more blue, right? So these are predominantly African American areas. So let's see, West Oakland and North Oakland are heavy, heavy African American. You can see a lot of blue in this area, right? You could also see a lot of blue and a mix of people, kind of where I just went over in the Fruitvale area. That's a circle. And then finally, Latinos and African Americans as predominant groups, you can kind of see, I'm going to represent with a blue and an orange crescent moon. So here you go. In deep East Oakland, you see Black folks, Latino folks mainly, right? And a little bit of Asian. But that's deep East Oakland right here. And we're going to use this map to see where the pollution is. But before we do that, we want to understand that what we're seeing here is the history of this country, right? Segregation, separation of areas based on race and class. And so let's continue. So here's a map again, and we're going to talk about environmental racism. So right here, this purple X is going to equal pollution. And we're going to put the X's where the most pollution happens. And we're going to start in West Oakland. And West Oakland has the port. And the port is one of the most polluted areas in the city of Oakland. And so it's no surprise that highest levels of asthma happen in West Oakland, and you have predominantly Black people living in West Oakland. The port causes a lot of pollution, right? We also have along the San Leandro corridor that you see here, the street San Leandro is an area that is designated for industry. And so all those purple X's are basically right around where CCPA is, right around where the BART Coliseum are, and then going into deep East Oakland, it continues, right? And these are areas in Oakland that are the most polluted. And you can see right away that these areas are not in areas where there's predominantly white people. They're in areas where there's predominantly people of color, and even more in Black and Latino areas. And so let's continue and see exactly what those things are here. So right here you have a close-up of pretty close to where CCPA is. So San Leandro Street is designated as an industrial zone, which means factories, warehouses, and industry, which equal more pollution. And you can see right here all these different places where people live, but it's also a lot of industry. And one of the ones I want to focus on is an area called the ABI Foundry, which is one of many places that pollute our own community, right? We're talking about 77th and San Leandro. And here is a picture of part of it. And so people in East Oakland identify smells resembling burnt rubber or burnt asphalt. The ABI Foundry at San Leandro Street and 78th in East Oakland has been there for 113 years, and since long before housing grew around it. And so this area here, neighboring residents complain of strong foul odors from the foundry and describe common symptoms including headaches and eye, nose, and throat irritation. Foundry neighbors believe ABI is a major factor in community high rates of serious health problems, pointing to the neighborhood's high rates of asthma, heart disease, and respiratory problems. I'm sure some of you that are listening to this video can immediately kind of think of this smell or already remember, oh yeah, I smell this a lot in my own neighborhood, because this is right where you guys live, a lot of you live. And so I wanted to I'm trying to go fast because I think my computer's about to go to sleep because I don't have a plug. But anyways, Here's a Sunshine Biscuits factory, recycling place. This is all by where a lot of CCPA students live, on 77th and San Leandro Street. And all around that, we have all these things. We have the 880, which is a freeway that allows diesel trucks. Diesel causes cancer, right, to go along it. But the 580, where predominantly more white people live, they don't allow diesel trucks to go there. That's a clear example of environmental racism. They allow the diesel trucks to go through the poorest communities, polluting the air, but not in the on the 580, which is predominantly white. And so you have pick and pull, you have these factories, you have all this stuff that they produce in East Oakland off of San Leandro Street, which affects our health. And then here's Oakland Hills. And the tractor trucks are not allowed on the 580 or the 13 freeway. And there's a lot more green and no industrial zones. And so you can see environmental racism and the way it plays out. So one of the opposites of environmental racism is environmental justice. And so we want to embraces the principle that all people and communities have a right to equal protection and equal enforcement of environmental laws and regulations. And so these posters kind of talk about that, right? Which we're going to get into a little later on, and kind of talk about what do we need in our community? What do we demand for our community to have a safe and healthy space? And so that's it. So I'm going to leave you with this. What is environmental racism? How does it affect people of color? All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop this video here. Let's see.